Today I want to address a question that I get relatively often, and that is if you're producing Dolby Atmos with Ableton Live, how do you create a 7.1.2 Dolby Atmos bed track, given that Ableton can only do stereo? It is possible, and I've already talked about that previously. However, a couple of things have changed since then, and I found a much more elegant way on how to do that, and this is what we're going to talk about today. So if you're a Dolby Atmos producer and you're working with Ableton Live, this is a video that might interest you. Before I get started, let me quickly address why you want to create a bed track in Dolby Atmos, even though you technically don't need one. You could work with objects alone and that would be perfectly fine. However, the bed track is particularly useful for purposes of hosting immersive effects, in particular reverb. So if you have a sound object, a three-dimensional sound object, for example, that you're moving around three-dimensional space, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to attach the reverb directly to the object, because then the reverb would be located in or positioned in a particular area in your three-dimensional space. What you actually want to have is you want to have the reverb all around you, and for that purpose, you would use a bed. Now, we can't really use multi-channel tracks in Ableton. That is a limitation that we have to live with. However, Ableton has the ability to be extendable with the help of Max for Live devices, and this is essentially how we're going to add a multi-channel bed to our Dolby Atmos setup. We're actually going to go through Ambisonics with the use of an Ambisonics toolkit, and then convert that Ambisonics into a 7.1.2 bed track that we are then going to route into the Dolby Atmos renderer. In this video, I'm going to use the bed exclusively for reverb, and in doing so, I'm going to go one step further than usual. I'm going to separate out the dry signal from the wet signal, and we're going to send the dry signal into object channels of our Dolby Atmos setup and the wet signal into our bed. And in doing so, this will allow me to control the reverb and the object independently. And on top of everything, we're going to synchronize the panners, the one panner that is responsible for generating the reverb and the second panner that is responsible for moving the object around. And this will actually work quite well, and we will be able to control both with only one set of controls. And with that being said, let's get started. In order to demonstrate the setup, I'm going to use a very simple project today, which consists of only one drum loop, a dry drum loop. Let's just have a listen what we have here. And I'm obviously going to use a Mac today simply because we want to work with Dolby Atmos, and if we want to use Dolby Atmos in connection with Ableton, we need to use the external Dolby Atmos renderer, and that unfortunately is only available for Mac operating systems. So for this particular setup, a Mac is a must, unfortunately. Now let's first have a look at the actual Dolby Atmos setup. Couple of things that we need to prepare in order to make everything work. First of all, we need to have the Dolby Atmos renderer open. In the Dolby Atmos renderer, in the preferences, you need to set the input device to be the Dolby Audio Bridge and the output device to whatever output device you're using. In my particular case, I'm sending everything through the Rodecaster. I've also this time enabled binaural monitoring, because a lot of people always ask me to do everything in binaural, so that's what we're going to do today. So I switched over to headphone only mode and essentially kind of set it to binaural so that we listen to everything in binaural mode. So if you're listening to the audio on speakers, be aware that this is actually meant to be heard or meant to be listened to with headphones. And that is essentially everything that we needed to do with the Dolby Atmos renderer. In the live setup, what we have in the settings, we need to set the output device to be the Dolby Audio Bridge in order to make sure that all the channels are routed into the Dolby Atmos renderer. And that is essentially pretty much it. So if I play that loop, it actually is already reaching the Dolby Atmos renderer on channels 1 and 2, because those are sort of the channels that Ableton automatically kind of routes the output to. However, currently we don't yet have any time code, so we first of all need to complete our Dolby Atmos setup in order to make sure that everything is actually reaching the Dolby Atmos renderer correctly. And for that particular purpose, what we need to do is we need to add the timecode plugin. So let's just do that. So I'm going to add an additional audio track, and I'm going to drop the timecode plugin, the LTC plugin. And here we are. The LPC generator. I'm going to set that to 30 frames per second. Just make sure that the frame rate is set in the renderer and in this LTC generator plugin identical. In my particular case, it's 30 frames per second. Doesn't make a whole lot of difference because, quite frankly, we are not really using any video anyway, but nevertheless, it will complain if the frame rate is incorrect. And then we need to route the LTC plugin into the Dolby Atmos renderer. So we're going to route it directly into the external out, and we're going to route it into channels number 129. That is the channel at which the Dolby Atmos renderer expects the time code. And if we play the audio now, we now see the time code is coming in correctly. So let's, in the next step, let's turn that track into an object, into a Dolby Atmos object. And for that purpose, there are really two things that I need to do. First of all, I need to add the Dolby Atmos music panner. The music panner will make sure that the panning information is sent to the Dolby Atmos renderer. So I'm going to add that to this track. I'm going to set the object pair, and I'm going to use the first available object pair. In my particular case, it's going to be 11 and 12. So let's switch that to 11 and 12. Also, always make sure that the Dolby Atmos music panner finds the renderer. You can see that if that little button here is green, then essentially it knows that the renderer is here. And that's essentially everything that we need to do here. And the next thing I need to do is I also need to make sure that I'm sending the audio in the corresponding channels, because once, if you're working with Dolby Atmos, you're aware that you should be aware that the panning information and the audio information are sent independently into the Dolby Atmos renderer. The panning information comes through the music panner, and the audio information is routed through the Dolby Audio Bridge. So we need to set the audio to external out, and we're going to send that into channels 11 and 12, and that should now reach the Dolby Atmos renderer as objects. So it's now coming in at channels 11 and 12. The blue circles indicate that the panner is connected, and the green kind of dot indicates that audio is coming in at objects 11 and 12. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the audio signal. I'm going to send that once into the object channels 11 and 12. That's what I'm already doing. And I'm also going to send that into the bed channels. I'm going to start with channels 1 and 2, and then we're going to make that multi-channel. But let's first start with sending it into 1 and 2. And in order to do that, I'm going to use a nifty little Max for Live device that has been developed by Cycling74, the makers of Max. And this allows us to send audio to any external output by simply adding this Max for Live device to our track. So let's do that. Now, the Max for Live device that I'm going to use is called Audio Routes, and I'm going to leave links to all the devices that I'm going to use in the description below. You can simply download it for free. And we need to go into presets, audio effects, Max audio effects, imported. And here we have the Audio Sense device, and let's drop that here. And what this will allow us to do is it will allow us to add an additional output. So what we can do now, for example, is we can send that to an external out, and we're going to send it to external out 1 and 2. And if I now play the audio again, I actually see that the signal is coming in at channels 11 and 12 because that's sort of where it was sent through the track itself. And then it's also coming in at channels 1 and 2. And that is from that audio send device, which is actually a really nice device. We can mute the individual sends by clicking on that little button here. And then we can also control the amount of essentially how much we are going to send out. So that is actually fairly nice. We are going to leave the through button on here because once again, we want to actually have that duplicated. We want to have it once in the object channels, but also in the bed channels. And we are not going to mess with the overall gain, so we can simply switch that off here, and that should actually work fine. Let me just double check. Yeah, everything is working fine. Now what I want to do now is I want to use one of those two signal paths in order to create the multi-channel reverb, and for that purpose it actually makes sense to switch the outputs around. So I'm going to send the audio through the audio send device directly into the object channels because that audio is not processed any further. It's just sent into the Dolby Atmos renderer. And I'm going to do all the processing that is needed for the reverb on the track itself. And for that purpose we're going to actually turn off the sends completely. So we're going to to not send the audio to anything. So if I play that now, I only get the audio object. But I still have the audio signal on that particular track, and I can now convert it into multi-channel audio in order to add a reverb. The way we're going to do that is with the help of Envelop for Live, which is an Ambisonics toolkit that works in Max for Live. It can be downloaded for free. Once again, links in the description below. And we're going to use that in order to convert the signal that is on the track first into Ambisonics. Then we're going to add an Ambisonics reverb, and then we're going to convert it back into multi-channel audio and send that multi-channel into the Dolby Atmos renderer. So let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a source panner to our track here, an Envelop for Live source panner. Now, be sure that you use the latest version of Envelop for Live, because we're going to need some devices that are only available since 11.3.11. So just make sure that you have the latest version installed. And we're going to add a source panner here. So let's take that source panner, drop it here. And then we need to convert that back into Ambisonics. So what that source panner is doing here is essentially taking in the stereo signal, converting that into third order Ambisonics. And what we need to do is we need to convert that back into 7.1.2. And for that purpose, we need to put a master bus device on an audio track. Can be any track, is not allowed to be the master track, but any other track is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply use one of the return tracks that Ableton automatically generated. So let me just kind of delete the delay here. And we're going to add a master bus device. Now, if you add the master bus device that comes with Envelop for Live, you will see that in the decoder settings, I have a couple of different options. However, I do not have the type of decoder that I actually need for the bed track. I have a 7.1 decoder and I have a 7.1.4 decoder, but what I actually need for Dolby Atmos is 7.1.2 or even better 7.0.2, because we don't really want to use the LFE channel. Now, in order to have access to that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to use the regular master bus device. I'm going to use the modified master bus device that we used for head tracking. And even though we are not really doing head tracking here, this modified master bus device actually has a 7.0.2 decoder on board, so we can use that in order to convert the Ambisonic signal into 7.0.2. And in addition to that, we also have additional routing options that are useful. So for this particular purpose, please use the modified master bus device. Once again, I'm going to leave links in the description below. You can simply download that for free. It's very easy to install and to use. So let's just switch that to 7.0.2. And then we're going to turn off the monitoring, because we actually don't want to have anything kind of coming out of the master bus device and kind of add it to our output. We actually want to have these channels sent directly into the Dolby Atmos renderer. So we're going to send that to channels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10. And this will now send convert the second signal path of the object of that particular track into Ambisonics, convert Ambisonics back into 7.0.2. So we have everything but the LFE channel, and then route that into the Dolby Atmos renderer. So let's just see what we have if we play the audio. And as you can see, I have the 10 channels coming in. Now, the nice thing about this setup is that currently the signal comes in very loud, but even though we are working with these devices, we can actually use the fader in order to control the overall gain of the signal, which is actually nice, because both the source panner and the audio send are actually reacting to the fader, which is really, really cool. So we can use the fader in order to control the signal. So let's leave it like that. So the last thing we need to do is we need to add a reverb, and the best way to do that is by using a reverb return track. And in this particular case, we're going to use an Envelop for Live reverb return track. And this is something that is possible since the very latest version of Envelop for Live. It was not possible to do that before. Before, you actually had to put the reverb on each individual track and then route the reverb into the Dolby Atmos, into the Envelop for Live master bus device. But with 11.3.11, 11.3.11, they added a send and receive device in the Envelop for Live system that allows us to create a reverb bus. And this is what we're going to do here. So we're going to actually use the bus that's already called reverb. Let me just delete the regular reverb. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the audio from the track and we're going to send that. So we're going to use in the Envelop for Live 11.3.11, you have two devices that are called aux send and aux return. So we're going to add an aux send device to our track that is going to take the audio and it's going to send it into the group A. And then we need to receive that at the return track. So we're going to use the return device and we're going to add that to our return track. And that will essentially receive the audio signal. Let me just see if everything is coming through correctly. So the audio is now routed through the Envelop for Live source panel, through this auxiliary send, in group A. It is then received at the aux return, and from there it is sent further to the master bus device. And the last thing now is that we need to simply add a reverb to our aux return track, and that is going to be the reverb that comes with the Envelop for Live system, and that is this convolution reverb here. So let's just add that here. And here we have it. It has connected. And let's see if we get the reverb through that track. So let me maybe turn off the signal. Now currently, the way I've set it is that I'm sending dry and wet signal through that reverb. Let me just switch that over to wet completely. Now, for reasons that are not completely clear to me, I actually need to change the rotation of that reverb to 0 here. For some reason that is rotated incorrectly. So as you can hear now, it's kind of oriented it correctly. I'm not quite sure why that is, but it is what it is. So let me just maybe kind of reduce the gain here a little. And let's bring the dry signal back. But it's still a little bit too wet, so let me go back into the reverb and just turn it down a little further. Yeah, that is better. Yeah, let's leave it like that. We can now bring the overall signal back up if you want to. And that essentially means that we now have a 10-channel reverb in our 7.1.2 track, and the object is going into channels 11 and 12. Now, if I want to change the position of the object, I now have to do that in two places. I have to do that here in the music panel. That will change the position of the object, and I also have to change that in the source panel, which changes the position of the object that is used in order to generate the reverb. Now, it would be nice if you would be able to control both panels with only one set of controls, and this is actually possible to do. However, in order to achieve that, we need to switch the signal into a mono signal, or to be more exact, into a twin signal that is sort of two channels that are located at the same position, and that is because of the way the two panels work, or kind of work differently, let's call it that way, because one of those panels essentially kind of controls the stereo pair differently than the Dolby Atmos panel. So that's one of the problems that we're running into. So if we want to control them with one set of parameters, what we can do is the following. First of all, we need to switch the source panel to mono. So let's just switch that over to mono, and then we need to switch that to Cartesian coordinates, because that's the way the music panel works. And then we're going to do the same thing with the music panel. We're going to switch that into copy mode, which essentially means that the two objects are located at the same position. And that essentially means that we now have two controls. We have X, Y, and Z controls on both the Dolby Atmos music panel as well as the Envelop for Live panel. And that means that we can create one control that controls both. And we can do that with a macro. So let's add a macro to that set. And for that purpose, we first need to group the individual devices that we have on the track. So let's just let's just select the 4 devices and let's group them. Now, if you're doing it that way, be aware that the aux send device doesn't really like to be grouped. So it can actually happen, especially if you mess around with the individual devices within that particular group. So for example, if you're adding an additional Envelop for Live device to that group, that it will actually lose connection, and that is because it doesn't really like to live in a group. However, if you're doing it the way I do it here, it should work just fine. And then what we're going to do is we're simply going to add our macros, and we are going to map, first of all, we're going to map the X coordinate here to our first macro. We're going to map the Y coordinate to our second macro, and we're going to add the Z coordinate to our third macro. And then we're going to do the same thing with the music panner. So let's just open that up here. So we have the X. We're going to map that to our X. We're going to map the Y to our Y. And we're going to map the Z to our Z. And let's close the mapping section here. And let's close that so that we see everything. So if I'm now controlling the X coordinate, I see that is moving the X in the source panner as well as the X coordinate in the Dolby Atmos music panner, and I'm now controlling the object simultaneously with kind of that part of the object that generates the reverb. So let's play around with that. So I can now kind of move that to the left. And once again, I'm now not only changing the position of the object, I'm also changing the position of the reverb. And I'm doing that with one set of controls. Back, and I can also move it up if I want to. You have the object, and I'm still getting all 10 channels from the reverb. And this works actually quite well. So now I have one set of controls that I can use in order to generate the object, or to control the object, position of the object, as well as also the position of the reverb. Now, disadvantage obviously is that we have to work with the Envelop for Live reverb, which is a convolution reverb. However, if you go to the Envelop for Live site, you can actually download a couple of different convolution or impulse responses. So you have a couple of options on how that reverb actually sounds, and that works quite well. So as I already said, there are a couple of limitations to this approach. The first one is that if you want to use the trick that we used in order to synchronize the 2 panners, you need to switch that into mono mode, or technically it's really 2 mono objects that are at the same position. If that's something that you don't want to do and you want to actually work with stereo tracks instead, you have to use the panners independently. Just make sure that you're panning them in the same way so that the reverb fits the actual position of the object. The second issue is with the grouping of the Envelop for Live devices. For some reason, sometimes that creates Envelop for Live to lose signal. However, once it works, it usually is stable. So if it works, you don't lose the connection unless you're messing around with it. So once it works, just don't mess around with that particular group and you will be fine. And the final thing is, and that's actually a little bug in the modified Envelop for Live master bus device, and that is if we go to let me just kind of move that around here, and let's go to the Envelop for Live master bus. If you're saving the project and you're reopening it, for some reason this modified master bus device does not open up with the correct decoder. So whenever you load up a project that you saved that way, what you need to do is you need to switch it over to a different decoder and then switch it back, and that will reset the 7.0.2 decoder, and then everything works fine. So this is really everything I wanted to say today. Now, some people are concerned about the use of 7.1.2 bed tracks because 7.1.2 isn't really fully immersive. I've pointed out in many videos that I generally don't have an issue with that as long as we're using it for reverb. However, if you want to use more than 10 channels for your bed layout, so for example, for a 7.1.4 bed track or even a 9.1.6 bed track, something that you can do, for example, with the Fiedler Audio Dolby Atmos Composer, you can actually do that with Ableton too, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It's a slightly different trick. I'm going to show that in one of the future videos. If you're interested in that, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel. And if you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section below or join our Discord community. That link is in the description below. And with that being said, see you at the next video.